July 6th, 2020 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting on its study of parliamentary duties and the COVID-19 pandemic. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on May 26th, the committee may continue to sit virtually until September 21st to consider matters related to the COVID-19 pandemic and other matters. Certain limitations on virtual meetings held until now are now removed. Oh, I'm going to, I hear Justin ferociously typing away there on my other phone there. Just as mentioned, the committee is now able to consider other matters, and in addition to receiving evidence, the committee may also consider motions as we normally do. As stipulated in the latest order of reference from the House, all motions shall be decided by a way of a recorded vote. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So that you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. And in order to ensure an orderly meeting, there's a few rules to outline. Oh, sorry, that hasn't happened to me before yet. I apologize for that interruption. Interpretation of video for the video conference will be made available, and I think all of our witnesses here today and the committee members are all regular members of the committee and are familiar with all the way the way interpretation works. So please select the language that you are speaking in at the bottom. You have the options of floor English or French, but for interpretation purposes, it's best to select the language that you are speaking. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon and activate your mic. Even though we've been doing this for a while, we do forget this from time to time. And also remember to mute your mic after you're done speaking. If a member wishes to speak outside of their designated time and raise a point of order, you can just unmute your mic and say that you have a point of order. And if a member wishes to speak to that point of order, then you can just use the raise hand function in the toolbar. Is everyone getting some kind of interruption in their sound? Okay. Oh, I think it's gone now. That's interesting. It sounded like maybe somebody was driving, or I don't know. Okay, when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, remember to have your mic on mute. And I believe everyone, I think Mark had just stated he got his headset as well. I strongly encourage that you use your headsets if you have them, or a mic that you think has the appropriate sound quality. Should any technical challenges arise, please do your best to let us know, whether it's with interpretation or whether it's with you being able to participate. We want to be informed right away so that you, if needed, we can suspend and make sure that you can participate. And so with that being said, please make sure that you are on gallery view, top right-hand corner. There's a speaker view option and a gallery view. Gallery view will ensure that you can see everyone. And with that being said, I'd like to welcome all our witnesses here today. Mr. Anthony Rhoda, Speaker of the House of Commons. Welcome, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Charles Robert, the Clerk of the House of Commons. Welcome back, Mr. Robert. Thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Patrice, the Deputy Clerk for the Administration. Mr. Gagnon, Deputy Clerk for Procedure. And Mr. Giuffre, Law Clerk of the House of Commons and Parliamentary Counsel. And Mr. Stéphane Aubé. Thank you so much for being back with us today. I know that you are participating remotely and everyone else is in the room. I believe we have opening statements, which were also circulated to us beforehand as well from our speakers. So Mr. Speaker, if you could go ahead and start with your opening statements, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and always a pleasure to come back and maybe dig a little bit deeper onto some of the things that most influences these days. Madame la Présidente, honorable membre.
Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee, I would like to thank you for your invitation to appear again as this committee continues the second phase of its study of parliamentary duties during the COVID-19 pandemic. As requested by the committee, work has continued to document a proposed solution for remote and electronic voting. At my request, the administration has also provided an analysis of in-person voting to respond to an inquiry made by the House Leader of the official opposition. The results of this work are contained in the reports submitted to the committee last week.
For electronic voting systems respects several key principles. It is mobile, allowing members to vote electronically whether or not they are present in the parliamentary precinct. It is fully bilingual and meets the House of Commons accessibility standards. It includes notifications to alert members through secure channels when a vote is to occur. The integrity of the voting process is fundamental to the legitimacy of our parliamentary democracy, and it follows that security of the proposed solution is paramount. Members must be confident that when they cast a vote using the system, it is recorded accurately and securely. In the proposed solution, members must use House of Commons managed devices. This is the same requirement as for participation in virtual committee meetings of hybrid sittings of the House. A recommendation by this committee that all members abide by this key requirement would further support achieving the necessary level of security. The remote voting solution would be integrated with existing security infrastructure of the House. This would allow us to use technologies already in place at the House to authenticate the identity of each member of Parliament every time they access the voting systems. Given that very little about the voting process is codified in standing orders, this would not require extensive modifications. The report submitted to this committee contains a draft text of a possible amendment. The method of voting would change so that all recorded divisions requested during virtual or hybrid sittings would be conducted using the electronic system. Members would not need to be in the House, either physically or virtually, for the reading of the motion prior to the division and until the results are announced. However, the voting process itself could continue to be familiar to members. When a question is dependent on the result of another vote, such as when the House votes on an amendment before voting on the main motion, I would, as Speaker, announce the first result and allot additional time for subsequent vote, unless unanimous consent were sought to apply to the results of the previous recorded division. As I mentioned at my last appearance, secret ballot voting introduces an added level of complexity and would not be included in the system's first phase.
In addition to preparing this proposal for electronic voting, the House administration has conducted an analysis of ways to allow all members to vote in person while respecting public health advice. This work was done, as I mentioned earlier, further to a letter I received on June 11th from the House Leader of the official opposition, and committee members have received a copy of this correspondence and the resulting report. The analysis of alternative in-person voting procedures has been guided by the principles of efficiency, accuracy, integrity, and transparency, which align with the current process of standing votes. In developing options, public health guidelines and protocols have been the priority. The analysis also takes into account two major factors: whether it is a single vote or involves a series of votes, and whether the vote is immediate or deferred. Les propositions mises de l'avant comprennent une version adaptée.
I've switched over to English and I'm still getting translation into French, but let's try this again. Among the proposal put forward is an adaptation of the Westminster practice of queuing. This method would call for members to form two lines in the courtyard outside the chamber and for the tally to be recorded by table officers. Another method would involve holding the vote in the chamber with members arriving and departing in several shifts to respect the maximum number of persons allowed in the chamber at any one time. Adaptations of this approach could be done through block or proxy voting, where whips or other members vote for themselves as well as some of their colleagues. The report also outlines how votes could be conducted outside of West Block at a larger location, such as Sir John A. Macdonald Building, which would be convenient to all members. As I've stated at each of my appearances before the committee, before this committee, the House administration is committed to providing the best possible support to all members. My team stands ready and is prepared to prepare a schedule for the implementation of any voting system or procedure that the committee chooses and to adapt the approach in response to the committee's feedback. We would be pleased to answer any questions at this time. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that's the only statement we have today. So we have all of the witnesses for an ample amount of time today. And I believe we should be able to get in a few rounds of questions today. And you can basically, I think, we can decide as we go. We can go for the whole time and get in all the questions that are desired by all the members here today. So we also have Ms. May here with us today. I just noticed into the opening statement. Welcome, Ms. May.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I had some trouble locating the password, but I was here in time to hear all of the speakers' statements. So I would, if there's room to squeeze me in anywhere, I'd be grateful.
Okay. All right, so we'll begin with our first round of 7-minute questions, starting with the Conservative member. I don't have the list in front of me today. I'll see if I can. Who is it? That Mr. Richards, please go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got all sorts of questions. We'll get as many of them as we can in here anyway. Maybe want to start, I suppose, with a little bit about the electronic voting options. Just in regards to the potential for app-based voting. I know when we were doing our report, the first report we did back in April and May, administration was moving ahead with making arrangements for the virtual and hybrid sittings even while we were doing the study. And I'm wondering if there has been any work being done at this time towards building a voting app in parallel to this study that's happening right now.
Yes, there has been work being done. The staff is working diligently to accommodate whatever this committee decides. And based on the questions that have come in, the administration, the staff members in IT have been working and looking at what's being done, not only possibly for ours, but right across the country, or right around the globe as well.
So can you maybe indicate how much money has been spent so far on the app, or how much they estimate the app, the development of the app costing in total when it's completed?
You know, I'm going to have to defer to our Monsieur Aubé on this one. He controls the IT, and it's his department, so he would have a better answer than I would. Monsieur Aubé.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Richards. Currently, we do have some resources, some internal resources to the HAWC that are assigned to this project. We've been working at this for over 6 weeks now. So these are costs that we would have incurred already. So we have not incurred yet additional costs for building this toolbox that could be used for a system moving forward, sir.
Okay, so there hasn't been any contractors or consultants hired
No.
at this point or engaged to assist with the work?
No, sir. The only partners that have been engaged in this process is CSEC and the House of Commons staff, sir.
Okay, and if the committee is to end up recommending an app being used for voting, how long would it take before, what would be the estimate in terms of how long it would take before that would be available to be used?
Well, we believe if we'd be given the okay very quickly, we could possibly have something around for the return to Parliament, sir, in September.
Okay. In terms of, now this might be back for the speaker again, but with the suggestions in regards to roll call voting, there were suggestions in the communique that we received from the speaker. I believe it was the speaker that suggests that we'd have to have an extended presence of a member on camera in order to be able to authenticate their identity. That was my understanding anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then secondly, with the app-based voting, what would be done in order to authenticate a member of Parliament and their identity and ensure that it's not someone else using the MP's device, for example?
Yeah, I guess Mr. Richards, you're referring to with the individual voting, where you would call on the person's name and the person's face would appear every vote. That's the roll call. Okay, right. Very good. Yeah, that one would be approved. Well, you would have the evidence of the person being there. Obviously. On the other one, with the app, again, there's authentication that happens. There's a House-approved equipment that is also being used. So there's encryption and there's that. Sure. Maybe for those details, I might want to pass it back to Mr. Obey. Sure. We could go into more details on how that is certified.
If you could, because I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, like, I want to ensure we don't have a scenario where, if someone was able to have the device, especially, a member could even choose to provide it to somebody and provide their password. So how would we actually verify that it's being used by the member themselves?
Everything. I'll let Mr. Obey answer that one. There's quite a number of different, but he'll be able to go into more detail on that one.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, Mr. Richards. So we're looking at different things, sir, to ensure that we can authenticate the person. So for sure, the use of their accounts on the Hill would be one of the things that would be required to able to vote. So you would need to have access to the personal information for the personal account of the member to participate. As the speaker said, we'll also recommend that the device of the House with a certificate of the House is also used to authenticate. So we're looking at multiple factors to authenticate that person, sir. And we're also looking at electronic signatures as a possible way. And we also have an approach to biometrics that could be used also if recommended by this committee, sir. That could be used. So we're looking at multiple factors, sir, to ensure that we can guarantee the authentic fee of that person, sir.
So none of those would involve actual facial recognition or having the person on camera. I mean, the biometrics, I guess, could potentially be, I'm assuming there'd be a fairly significant cost in the biometrics. Maybe you can just explore that a little further for me, because I'm just trying to understand how, outside of facial recognition or something of that nature, how we would actually determine that it wasn't, the MP hadn't shared the, login information, et cetera, with somebody else, right?
Well, the toolkit that we have, sir, already at the House, we do have the ability to use different models for electronic signatures. But we could also, in this application, sir, we could also have the ability
is up, right?
to actually...
I know I misspoke and said 7, and I do have the list. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought I was on mute. I've been kind of off today.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I just wanted you go ahead, finish up.
So I was just saying, So we would have the ability, sir, to leverage the concept of taking a picture while someone's casting their votes. So that is a capability, sir, that we would have in our toolkit that we already have as a piece of infrastructure that we have not used for any other purposes. But we have different ways, sir, to do electronic signatures at the house within our current infrastructure. As an example, we currently use Entrust as an electronic signature mechanism to ensure that when someone's issuing an email or encrypting an email to someone that we know it's actually that person that sent it. So there's different ways, sir, that we can leverage to do that.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Obey. And at the beginning, I misspoke and said 7. That's what happens when you take time off. But anyways, it's 6-minute rounds for everyone. We have gone over the 6 minutes, but I wanted to allow Mr. Obey to finish his thought. Mr. Turnbull, you're next.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and welcome everyone back. It's great to have you back on PROC, and it's always a pleasure to see you. Mr. Speaker, it's great to hear your opening remarks. I certainly appreciated the comment that you made. I read through your opening remarks. Thanks for providing them in advance. About very little about the voting process being codified in the standing orders. I thought that was a really important observation that I certainly hadn't made before. I wonder, I know that the House has provided, or your office has provided a table of standing order changes. I think some of them are minor. I think you've indicated in your opening remarks that electronic voting would not require extensive modifications. Could you maybe just highlight maybe 1 or 2 of the key changes that you think would need to be made?
Oh, you're on mute still?
I think we're all out of practice with the mute, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Now, there's a number of different areas that could go on. I could go on for a while, but I think it's important to note that the standing orders, there are minor changes that would have to be made, but nothing major in order to allow the electronic vote to happen. So it could go rather smoothly. Some of the major ones that we've already taken care of, one like the presence of members in the House. We've already had a certain amount of virtual presence. It wouldn't be too hard to adjust that way. The physical setting in the House is the other one. By changing very small areas, we could make it so that the members could be physically somewhere else, but still be present for the purpose of the vote. Tabling presentations is already there. I mean, that's been taken care of. So when we look at the whole thing, I mean, really, there's not a lot that has to be changed. It's just a matter of getting some kind of agreement amongst the members on what they will accept, and then we could proceed from there.
Yeah, and thank you for that. So it's not really a matter of rule change that should be holding us back. It's really about getting agreement from all parties. It's interesting to me, we heard recent reports in the news about the coronavirus mutating. I think I've been reading a little bit about viruses. I'm no health expert, but all viruses apparently mutate as they copy and regenerate themselves. I think there's no evidence at the moment that the second strain of the coronavirus would be more deadly, but there is some evidence, I think, accumulating that it would spread more quickly. And so, interestingly enough, I think we're all thinking about the fall. We're thinking about potentially a second wave. And I noticed one of your comments was, about the principles that you use to evaluate some of the physical options that were provided. And I just, one of them was efficiency. To me, when I think of a long queue like they've done in the UK, I don't think that that's, overly efficient in my view. And it's not necessarily the best option for reducing the risk to people's health and the spread of the virus. So would you agree with that the best option in a case of a second wave is likely to be a virtual option? That's to the speaker. And you're on mute again.
The decision of what is best will have to be decided by the House and hopefully by this committee as a recommendation. The things that we have to take into consideration when putting it together, sure, efficiency is very important. And when you do have a queuing system, 3 hours would not be uncommon for a vote. I'm sure that with time, as things get better, it would probably shorten a bit, but that would be probably a first thing to consider. Of course, you want accuracy, which could be covered in both systems as well as transparency, seeing that the person shows up, they get to vote, so that they can be confirmed or electronically, as Mr. Obey had mentioned earlier, making sure that the authentication of that person is actually voting so that everything comes together. Now, the first thing that is mentioned, if you go to the list of priorities, safety. Making sure that our members are not exposed, the members of Parliament are not exposed to the virus or any danger. And that's something that has to be paramount to all decisions made. If people are brought to one place, yes, there is a concern. But if that is what the House decides, then we'll have to work around it and do the best of our ability to not to minimize that danger.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Obey, I welcome you back as well. I always have questions for you because I know security comes up when we talk about electronic voting. Isn't it not true that all of the House managed devices, the iPhones that we all get, have facial recognition built into them? Could we not use the biometrics as part of the security for electronic voting? Mr. Obey?
Yes, sir. The newer devices, because there's still some members that have older devices, sir, but all the newer devices that are being provided to the members of Parliament have built-in biometrics that could be leveraged as part of our solution if it would be chosen by the committee.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I know
That's all the time we have,
thank you, Madam
unfortunately.
Chair.
If I may, Madam Chair, just for a moment, I just want to correct a statement I made. The queue would be about 40 to 60 minutes of vote, not 3 to 4 hours. The block shifting would be the shifting would be the 3 hours per vote. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you.
My
You almost
apologies.
gave me a heart attack there. I was thinking, oh my goodness. But wow, but still long. Okay, Madame Normandin, please. 6 minutes.
Ms. Normandin, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I thank all the witnesses for taking the time to come and see us and answer all our questions. I'll start by talking about something we didn't talk a lot about. We talk about roll call, but a little less about yes or no vote when we're in the House, and that the Speaker has to say that the nays or the yeas have it. Have you studied the issue? Have you thought about doing it virtually? Do we have any solutions for this type of voting? Yes, it is possible. It depends on what is happening. It can be done electronically. People could raise their hand electronically or use their voice by saying yay or nay. It might be a little bit more difficult because we're not present in the House per se, but I'm sure there would be a way to do it. It would be easy to adapt. And along the same lines, if after a yay or nay vote, 5 MPs would get up in the House, we could still manage. Yes, indeed. Perfect. How about limiting the period during which votes can be held? Ms. Blaney said that there are time constraints. Canada is a huge country, so we're not on the same time schedule. Could we easily say we will only hold votes between such and such time? Well, to make sure that everyone has a chance to vote, we want to have a period that lasts 30 minutes to give everyone the chance to vote. the bells would ring and members would have the time to get ready to vote. When we vote in Ottawa, we vote in Ottawa. So if we start to have 2 or 3 voting periods, things would last a little too long, in my opinion. From what I've seen so far, it would be 30 minutes during the session. As you know, voting periods can take place between 10 a.m. to midnight. We never know. There might be time when someone in another region with another time would have a harder time to vote, but that decision needs to be made by your committee and by members. But usually it's within 30 minutes that things would take place. Perfect. The committee could decide that this 30-minute period, with the bells ringing, could only take place within a normal daytime from noon to 5 p.m. Ottawa time. Well, it will be up to your committee, up to the House to decide. Now, with the queuing system, the Westminster system, you envision a hybrid system. Vote by proxy, vote electronically, and vote by queuing. Did I understand correctly? Depending on what the committee decides, I hope the committee will choose one method or another, but many things can happen for a vote, depending on what your committee wants, what Parliament wants. It'll be up to you to decide. A more technical question, Mr. Aubé might be able to help me on that. If we decide to choose a hybrid solution, if we do part of the vote queuing and another part electronically, we'll need to make sure that someone didn't vote twice. We'll need to compare both lists. Am I right? That is one of the controls that will be put in place to make sure that one person cannot vote twice. Yes. Perfect. So if we go with a hybrid solution, queuing and virtual voting, the delay will have to be longer to compile all the results. It'll be longer than if people were voting only electronically. It will definitely take longer to make sure that no one votes twice. In the report, we recommend a better way of doing things, either electronically and then either queuing. If you decide to go with a hybrid model, we'll have to put controls in place. But for things to be efficient, if there are successive votes and one depends on the previous one, it'll take much more time if we use a hybrid method. Yes. So that's about it for my questions, Madam Chair. I think I just have 10 seconds left anyways.
Ms. Blaney, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, of course, to all of you for being here with us today. I really appreciated all of the reports that we received. So my first question, I guess, is just, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We don't know what is going to happen with COVID. And so I'm just trying to clarify something. Even if we do find a safe way to vote in the House, and you've listed numerous ways, my concern still is the traveling across the country. For myself, I come from Vancouver Island, and right now we've just been having our airports open up again. So we were having to take a ferry to get to Vancouver to fly, and often the flights are taking anywhere between a day to 2 days, which means that we have members not only leaving their communities but stopping along the way. So I guess my question is, was in your assessment, was there any work done around looking at those risks of having members traveling from across the country? And then the second part of that question is, how long with any of these methods would it take to sanitize the space? So if we have people queuing in the space, if we have people coming into the House of Commons to vote in different ways, do we have any understanding of just how long it would take to make those spaces safe again?
Okay, no, they're both very good questions. The health concern is probably the biggest one when you have members traveling from one part of the country to the other. When we look at Canada, I mean, we would probably under circumstances in Europe or other places have about 50 countries within the same space. So, I mean, we have different regions, and different regions are taking care of things differently based on their realities. We have different provinces, different areas of provinces who are opening up at a different rate. And that's something that is one of the realities. So when we start moving people from one place to another, yes, it's certainly a concern that has crossed our mind. And we will have to rely on the health officials to make that decision. And hopefully that's something that is considered when the committee brings out its report. On the other on the other issue, when we talk about sanitizing between sittings, I talked about the shifting, the block shifting, where you would come in, or where the shifting where you'd come in, a certain group would come in to be safe in the House, and it takes about 3 hours to go through one vote as opposed to different options otherwise. And one of the main reasons it takes so long is because you bring in only so many, they vote, they leave, then you have to sanitize everything in the chamber so that the next group coming in will have a clean and sanitized area to come through. So there is a certain amount of time involved in making sure that everything is suitable for the incoming members.
Thank you. I guess the other question that I have is just around the virtual voting practice. At this point, we have, of course, the bells, 15 to 30-minute bells, depending on the vote. And I also know, based on some of the information, Mr. Speaker, that you've given us in one of the reports, and there's been several, so I apologize for not saying which one, but I believe in one of the reports you identified that there was 2 members that you were still working with in terms of connectivity for them. So I'm just, I think of myself, if I drove 20 minutes out of town here, I would have no cell reception at all. And if there was a sudden vote, I wouldn't be able to get that information. And you know what, hopefully we have better planning around voting so I don't do that. But I understand that if I stay within this area, I'm okay. But I don't know if all members have the same connectivity. So I'm just wondering if that is a concern. And of course, in our last report, we did have a recommendation that if a member did not have access to appropriate connectivity to be able to vote or to participate in the House, that we would identify where they had to go to get that connectivity and make sure that that was something that the House of Commons supported them in doing. So I'm just wondering if there's been any work done around assessing that, and if there's any, I don't expect you to tell us the members, but if there's any members we should be concerned about, and what's the strategy around making sure that they have access not only to the House, but to the capacity to virtually vote.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I mean, it is a member's privilege to vote, and we don't want the member to lose that privilege or not be able to access it. Overall, things have been very good as far as access. Like we said, the last time we had a couple of members who were having issues, whether they go from home or from the office, there is a point where they can access. Maybe what I'll do is I'll pass this over to Monsieur Aubé, who can probably give us a lot more detail on what steps have been taken so that all members can have access to the vote, and make sure that access to internet is something that is available to all members. Monsieur Aubé?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair. I'm Laney. What we've actually done over the last few weeks is reassess every constituency office to ensure that there's appropriate connectivity. And as I had commented in a previous meeting, it was true that we had 2 specific members in the northern areas of Canada that were posing a problem, but we do have solutions for them. we do have the ability to provide facilities or provide connectivity to them if this committee would choose to. But we are constantly reassessing the connectivity that exists in your constituency offices. As I said, over the last few weeks, we've reassessed them and make sure that the appropriate level of connectivities were there in order to participate if the committee would choose to do so electronically for voting. Having said that, the challenges previously were more related to the homes of the members, because as you know, we provide connectivity to the constituency offices. So in the constituency offices, it was a little bit easier for us to assess the connectivity in these areas. While the homes, we do have some good statistics for every individual members, and we certainly would have a plan to make sure that it is available for them either in their constituency offices, most preferably, but if ever there'd be a need for them to stay home, we would find a way to make this happen for them.
Thank you, Mr. Obey. We are going to carry into our 5-minute round with Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Speaker, and everyone for being here. Let me preclude my comments by saying that the House of Commons staff has done an extraordinary, great job at keeping all of us safe, keeping the physical aspects of the building safe, and I've been quite comfortable every time that I've come to West Block and other areas, including my office in Confederation Building. So I want to say congratulations to the staff, and if you could relay that on our behalf, I would appreciate that. I'm not sure who these questions can go to, but I'd like to start by asking this. Since March 13th, there have been 9 sittings of the House of Commons. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Since March 13th, the Special Committee on the COVID-19 pandemic met 18 times in the House chamber. Is that correct?
Yes.
Since March 13th, there have been 4 in-person meetings of standing committees. Is that correct?
Let me check on that one. That one's
I would ask, Madam Chair, that while the Speaker is checking that
we stop the clock.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, we were just checking. We believe there was 4 that was there, and there's another one meeting tomorrow. And many of these have taken place virtually and worked out that way. So there has been a number of committee meetings that have taken place, even if they weren't in person.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For all virtual committee meetings, procedural clerks, interpreters, technicians, and other staff are required to be on Parliament Hill for every minute of every virtual committee. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh, wait a minute. One second. There are cases where they're not required here. So
like
it's
Mr.
a mixture.
This morning, I see. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since March 13th, there have been 156 virtual committee meetings lasting some 390 hours and 20 minutes. Would that roughly be correct?
I don't have the stats with me. I'll have to believe you on that. I trust you've done your homework. You're very efficient, and I'll have to go along with you, although I can't confirm it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, by my calculations, there have been since March 13th a total of 187 meetings and sittings. Are you aware of any actual COVID-19 associated cases with any of these 187 gatherings?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Are you aware of any suspected COVID-19 associated with any of these 187 gatherings?
I am not, no.
Are you aware of any required to quarantine as precautions because of their attendance at any of these 187 gatherings?
I'm not, no.
Are you aware of any contact tracing effort touching upon any of these 187 gatherings?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. Now, Mr. Speaker, you have very helpfully laid out several detailed options for in-person voting. Can you confirm that every single one of your proposals would comply with public health guidelines?
They were done with that in mind, and we would have to check once we start implementing to make sure, but we have done our best. And as you mentioned earlier, we have very competent staff who have done their work and made sure that everything was in place. So I feel comfortable saying that yes, But as we get closer and as things change, as things are shifting with the COVID-19 situation, we would have to examine as they are implemented, if that's what the committee and parliamentarians decide.
And did you seek public health guidance in implementing these or actually coming up with these proposals?
Yes, we did.
Okay. How much lead time would you need to implement these in-person voting options? I curiously heard Mr. Obey say that the app for a virtual voting could be done and ready by September. Would it be possible to put them into effect immediately if they were agreed upon?
I would feel more comfortable with telling you that September 21st would be the best time to implement it if needed. To implement them right now while we're not sitting, we've got 3 more sessions left, or 3 more sessions where they might be put in place. But I would feel comfortable with telling you that September return would be the best time.
Okay, thank you.
That would give us sufficient time.
Thank you. How much more time have I got, Madam Chair?
Madam Chair, it's Justin. Approximately 20 seconds for Mr. Broussard's time.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, one of the issues that comes up regularly as we discuss this is the issue of air travel. Public Health Canada has not advised any restrictions on air travel. Do you see that being a problem with MPs coming to Ottawa to vote in person?
Well, you know, depending on what you've heard and what you've all over, I mean, we would have to look at what the health officials are saying, but air travel seems to be safe. The thing that we have to take into consideration is that where have these people been, or where has the MPs been? Have they met with groups? Have they picked something up? Are they inadvertent carriers? And that's something that has to be taken into account, and something I hope that this committee looks at very closely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Broussard. Next up, we have Mr. Garrettson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Speaker, I haven't had a cavity in 7 years. Do you think that I should stop brushing my teeth?
No. Congratulations.
And congratulations to you and the incredible work that the House of Commons staff has been doing in order to produce the results of having no cases. You know, would you consider that a success?
Very much so. The staff has taken this very seriously, as members of Parliament have taken it very seriously. And a lot of the cooperation amongst the parties, amongst the members, and with staff have really made us to be an example for the world to follow.
Thank you for that. Mr. Obey, would you say that your main concern is when it comes to security of virtual voting, is your main concern to police members of Parliament to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, or is your main concern to prevent the infiltration of third parties from trying to disrupt the democratic process?
I would say my main concern, Mr. Garrettson, is to actually ensure that no one is interfering with the voting process, sir.
So would that include a member of Parliament, or are you referring to people coming in from the outside?
Well, I'm always of the premise, sir, that the members are honorable and will follow the regulations, sir.
That's a very good point. And to that end, Mr. Speaker, we have had a number of cases within, the House of Commons from time to time where it wasn't clear if somebody was in their seat or what the rule is or if they heard the question. And it seems to me in the, limited experience that I've had during the past 5 years, that what it really comes down to is the members, the member doing what is the honorable thing in terms of, if the member says that they were in a certain position at a certain time, the rulings from the speakers have usually been to trust a member in that regard, right?
It would be very difficult for the chair or the speaker to have his eyes on every member where he is, where she is at that time. We do call them honorable members, and we are all honorable members, and I rely on them
being honest.
The reason why I bring this up is because there appears to be two different themes when we talk about security. Some members of this committee talk about security from the perspective of the infiltration of third parties to disrupt our democratic process, but other members of the committee seem to be more concerned about if a member will give their device to another person or another individual who will then utilize that device to vote on their behalf. From a security perspective, from the speaker's perspective, which of those two are you concerned about more, Mr. Speaker? Are you concerned about individuals coming from the outside to disrupt our democratic process, or are you more concerned about questioning that honorability that you mentioned of the members?
The main concern that we have when putting a system together and making sure that it works is infiltration from the outside. And if someone comes in from the outside and disrupts how things are going or skews votes or arguments a certain way, then it really does interfere with the process. The voting itself, there's enough in place where a member has passwords. He will have passwords or will have certain number of safety measures that will avoid someone breaking in and taking his or her vote away, or his or her arguing time away, or a debate time away. That to me is it's up to the member to protect that.
And just on the topic of virtual voting, because during the discussions of virtual voting, we seem to be going down two paths. Do we do this through an app-based application, or do we do it through some kind of visual, like we do it on Zoom? But I just want to understand, the way that we do it in the House of Commons when we have a standing vote that takes 8 minutes is we go down rows. The speaker and the clerk staff can see ahead of time who's coming up next, who might be absent, who might not. Have you even thought of how you would practically implement that system on a platform like Zoom, where you have 17 or 18 pages of thumbnail pictures and you wouldn't necessarily have everybody lined up the way that it has to go? Like, has that been a consideration? Have you thought about that much, Mr. Obey or Mr. Speaker?
It's certainly been a discussion at the table when we were talking about different options and how we would handle that. I think we're capable of it, but it would certainly take a little bit longer.
What would be your preference, Mr. Speaker? Would it be to have an app base, or would it be to have people standing from? And I don't mean your personal preference. I mean based on the discussions you've had from administering the vote. What makes the simplest way for the speaker and the clerk staff to handle that?
That's all the time we have. Apparently, we don't have time for the answer for that, but maybe we'll get that on the next round.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm from my constituency office, and I've cut out 4 or 5 times, so I apologize if we have to suspend and I lose everybody. Thank you very much to Mr. Speaker, and again, the House administration team for your leadership. Evolving situation, like I think every job in Canada, including ours as members, have these days. Mr. Speaker, I just want to note about the various in-person options, and we're looking at app and electronic. Would it be fair to say that these options aren't mutually exclusive? And you've talked about different options for different circumstances and times. Would you suggest that in-person in September be the preference and that be the natural, then going to remote voting if need be? Can you kind of talk about the exclusivity of these or the ability to change?
The ability to change is really up to the House and up to the individual members. Can you blend them? Yes, it would be. It would probably cause a little bit of confusion, but overall, what happens is whatever this committee and the members of Parliament decide to go with, they'll have to. That's what our staff is ready to go with. Is it better to meet in person or virtually come September? COVID has been changing so drastically along the way. It's very difficult to predict what will happen in a month and a half or 2 months from now.
Sure. For the options for in-person voting, one of the things I made a note of about voting outside the chamber, have you given consideration to having a camera installed perhaps to capture the voting process at all? I don't know if that was noted in there at all.
I'm sorry, you'll have to clarify that question. The camera where, or how exactly do you mean?
For example, like in the queue voting, we talk about the option presented was it could be in the Sir John A. Macdonald building. Has there been talk of having a camera in the queue line, for an example, for the public to see that process at all?
It's not in the proposal. It's something that could be considered, I guess, as an extra precaution. But that's something that you may want to bring forward, Mr. Duncan, when the report is coming forward. It's not something that has been discussed.
I appreciate that. Switching to electronic voting in the roll call voting, you've mentioned about for the extended on-camera presence being required for voting on that. That's the way of identifying the MP's identity? Is that correct? Kind of the preference of Zoom and having that physical presence, that would be the way of validating?
That would be one of the ways of validating, yes.
And then by comparison on the remote app aspect, it's and I do respect we all are honorable members. I have no reason to suggest otherwise, of course, but it would be the sign in, not having that physical presence. It would be the trust or honor of the members that we wouldn't see or necessarily be able to see. That would be the disadvantage of the app. So having that in-camera aspect or in-person camera aspect would make the validity much easier to do, correct?
That is correct. There is a confirmation process when someone signs on to an app or through electronic voting. So, I mean, again, we're back to the integrity of the individual members and the honor of the members, which I believe I trust wholeheartedly.
Yep. And then again, with the in person or the in camera, the facing camera, we just wouldn't have to deal with that or question that at all. I'll just switch to committee, and you may wish to defer to some of your colleagues just about the virtual capacity for committee meetings. So one of the comments I hadn't written down was about the capacity for the technical aspect, and I give kudos to interpretation and all the technical teams doing this stuff. What's the plan in the fall when we come back, whatever we do choose about the technical capacities? And I think of all of our standing committees and the House and those types of things. Are we adding staff? Are we adding capacity for the short term here? What's the status update on both the IT and then the staffing aspect?
You know, I'll defer this one to Monsieur Aubé. I'm sure he'll be able to answer that with much more detail than I will. Mr. Aubé?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, Mr. Duncan. We are in the planning process, sir, to ensure that when we return in September, sir, that we offer a similar capacity to pre-COVID, unless I'm saying this unless the environment would change from here to then for the worse. But our goal, sir, is to put in place the proper resourcing model to support you with the appropriate capacity for supporting all committees as previous
and that's,
to COVID, sir.
And sorry to cut you, just that includes both the physical IT and the staffing requirements to administer that, correct?
We're looking at that, sir.
And you hope to have that by September 21st. So maybe one of the questions on that is the capacity of the full day or half day virtual hybrid sittings and all the committees running. You're saying that you're trying to get that all lined up so we could be full capacity with everything in September 21st, I think the date is?
It is our goal, sir, to provide an approach to the speaker to ensure that this happens, sir.
Thank you. And just, am I done, Madam Chair?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Next up is Dr. Duncan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all our witnesses today, and I too would like to recognize the extraordinary job the House leadership has done in allowing a virtual hybrid parliament. I will talk briefly about health. Today, 11.5 million cases worldwide, the US at 2.9 million cases. We are not finished the first wave. And I too would argue that the most important thing is the health and safety of everyone involved. If I could first ask our speaker, if I may, I'm looking, Mr. Speaker, for yes and no answers here. With the hybrid parliament, was it secure?
Yes.
Thank you. Was it tested?
Yes.
Was it accessible?
Yes.
Did it provide simultaneous English and French interpretation?
Yes.
Did it respect social distancing?
Yes.
Did it allow all members of parliament to take part and represent their constituents?
Yes.
Thank you. And did it allow for full participation by the media?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd now like to go to the clerk, and based on your experience, I will also ask the same questions. Was the system secure?
That's my understanding, yes.
Was it tested?
Certainly.
Was it accessible?
Yes.
Did it allow simultaneous English and French interpretation?
With a few hiccups, yes.
Thank you. Did it respect social distancing?
Of course.
And did it allow all members of Parliament to take part and represent their constituents?
Yes, indeed.
And did it allow for full participation by the media?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. As we come to the fall, I don't think any of us know what to expect. It is a novel virus. It is a new virus. There is concern about a second wave with influenza. How are you thinking about the health and safety aspects?
Well, health and safety is number one with everything we do, and we want to make sure that anyone coming onto the Hill is not bringing contamination to the Hill or leaving with contamination, making sure that everyone is safe. This is something that has been the case right from day one, and we want to continue to make sure that we do it to the best of our ability based on what is decided by the House.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Monsieur Obey, I'm wondering if you could take us through what an ideal virtual voting system would look like from your perspective in terms of all the security, what your recommendations in your ideal system would look like, please.
Madam Chair, Madam Duncan. So the first criteria, I think that we've all been discussing this, is the security aspect. So we want to make sure that if we go forward with electronic voting system, it is a secure system, and that we can validate that the results that are coming out of the systems are the results based on the votes of the members of Parliament. So for us, that is the first thing. It needs to be secure. The second thing is it needs to be easy to use for the members. So we'd want to make sure that anything that we build, we would be able to engage the members to ensure that they can do this in an efficient way.
Monsieur Obey, may I interrupt briefly for a second? Yep. What I'd like to know very specifically, what security steps you would recommend from the initial notification right through to the end of the vote, please.
Okay, so more specifically, we want to make sure
very
that all these steps are logged, Mrs. Duncan. So when we notify someone, we'd want to log that someone did receive the message, okay? And then when the person reads the message, the notification of votes, that we are aware that he received the notification. We've also want to make sure that we know when someone is logging in to the system. So we want to make sure that we know who's on it and is it the right person that's logging into it. We want to make sure that all transactions are encrypted, and encrypted in a way that ensures that no one can modify the results or influence the results through that encryption. And then after that, we want to make sure it's signed. So through multiple factors authentication, we want to be able to sign the transaction to ensure that it is the member that did the transaction. So we want to make sure that he uses the house device with the house certificate. He used his password. He wasn't traveling from Toronto to Vancouver in the last 15 minutes. And he did receive confirmation. So we want to ensure that the member, once he votes, he will actually get real-time confirmation of what he just did. And he will also get confirmation encrypted through different channels of his vote. So this is the way that we want to ensure that it is the member that did vote and that did confirm that he voted. And then the last part of it is the monitoring. We want to monitor, excuse me, Madam Chair, we want to monitor all these activities while the votes are happening.
Thank you, Monsieur Obey.
Thank you. That was very helpful, actually, very clear. Madame Normandin.
Madame Normandin, Madame Normandin. Thank you very much. Mr. Brassard touched upon this subject, and I would like to come back to standing committees. I did sit on the Immigration Committee a few weeks ago, and I would like to know if it was possible for MPs to sit virtually. Were they allowed to sit virtually when they were sent the notice?
No, il était pas. No.
Answer. That's an excellent question. We just had to talk amongst ourselves to be sure about this. No, they did not have that option. They had to come in person. Thank you very much. Maybe you are not aware about this, but I'd like to know if, as there is social distancing, you could not have more than a certain number of people in the room. So in my case, 4 of the witnesses were not able to appear in person. Yes, we have to think about all of that when committees sit. It's important to have an option and to be able to sit virtually or to appear virtually. I would like to come back to what Madame Jenny Kwan said. She is an MP from BC and sits on the Immigration Committee. She said that she could participate virtually, but in this case, she had to come and be physically present for the Immigration Committee. Is this the case? Answer, yes. So, for example, if we decide that certain parts of our parliamentary duties, for example, the fact of putting questions, we can ask questions virtually for question period, but if we want to go to a committee, we have to appear in person. Is this not creating certain hierarchy between our privileges? Answer, no, that's not necessarily the case. Parliamentaries and committees will make this decision according to what is possible, if they can come in person or if they will appear virtually. I don't think that this is establishing a hierarchy. It's a simple decision that must be made, and it is up to you to make this decision as a committee and also as an MP. Very well, but however, if standing committees have to sit in person and you can vote virtually in the House of Commons, does that mean that certain privileges will be harder to exert and others will be easier to do because you can do it in a hybrid or virtual manner? Answer. It is something that seems reasonable to say, but some people live very far from Ottawa. Other people live in Ottawa. Some MPs are further than others. So it's hard to decide that the people that are living far away will have less privileges than the other ones. Each MP has to do what he or she must do to exert his or her rights. I see that my time is up, Madam Chair.
Ms. Blaney, please.
Thank you. So just to follow up with my last line of questioning, I'm just wondering, does the speaker feel that the amount of time for bells is sufficient in a virtual setting for voting?
It's really up to the House. What's suggested was 30 minutes, and it's during that 30 minutes that the member has to vote. So it's not like in the House where you have 30 minutes warning, then you're in the House and you vote. You're told that there's going to be a vote, and the bell rings for 30 minutes. Once that 30 minutes is up, your voting time is up. So yes, that's something that was suggested. I feel comfortable with it. If the committee should feel that we need more than 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes, really, it's not a time that is carved in stone. It's a suggested time that seems reasonable. And reasonable means different things to different people. So I would rely on the committees and Parliament's advice on how we would determine what is the amount of time.
Thank you. And I'm going to follow up as well on the issue of committees. So right now there's a particular list of committees that can meet virtually, and the rest, if they want to meet, they have to meet in person. And that is something that's ongoing negotiations between the parties, as everyone knows. I'm just wondering if I could get any information on understanding if we will have the capacity for all the committees to be able to meet. I understand that part of the challenge, from what I understand, historically has just been the capacity and also the time constraints, because of course we have a big country with multiple time zones. So trying to pick times where members like myself who are in British Columbia are not sitting in front of a computer at 5:30 in the morning, we're trying to honor that. So I'm just wondering if the capacity will be there in September for all of the committees to be able to sit.
Yeah, that is one of the things that has been restricting the amount of committees who can sit. On capacity, if you don't mind, I'll pass it over to Mr. Obey, who would have a better handle on what it would take, or would Mr. Gagnon be better, or which one of you two would be best to answer this question?
Maybe I can start. It's André.
Okay.
Maybe I can start, and maybe Stefan can follow up. The special order that was adopted by the House on May 26th, that was essentially a reorder of the orders adopted previously, mentioned that some committees, about 9, would be able to meet virtually. But that special order ends on September 21st. So your question, from that perspective, would that relate directly to what happens on September 21st in terms of what committees would be meeting? And from that perspective, that means, with the information we have right now, that means that the committees that would have the possibility to meet would be only in person. And that maybe Stefan can add to that. But as you are aware, finding rooms that would meet the actual questions we have regarding health guidelines is fairly limited on Parliament Health. Maybe Stefan can add.
Well, it's all the time we have. Next up, we have Mr. Tucker. 6 minutes, please, Mr. Tucker.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to our guest today, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Speaker, and it's to do with the travel. And would you agree, and I know you've been an MP for a while, and you're not a medical background, I don't believe, but would you not agree that if we're concerned about safety, as members, we shouldn't be heading back to our ridings on weekends that in between our sitting days?
That's an option that has been discussed by many people, whether they stay here on the weekend or go home. The less exposure you have, the better it is. That's up to each individual member to decide, unfortunately.
And even before pandemic, we would take steps. If we know that you're going to be in a room or close to people that are sick, we take precautions. And that's what I think we should be doing in our personal lives and business, representing constituencies in Ottawa. I got some questions about the app, and I guess that's Mr. Obey, is that correct?
Yes, it
Obey?
is.
Pronounced right? Great.
Yep.
The app that you're developing right now, could you tell if that member was on a beach in Mexico when they were voting?
We could, sir.
And could you tell if they were where they were in the country? Like, would we restrict if a member was across the street from Parliament in a licensed establishment having a beverage? Could you tell where that individual was?
I wouldn't say, sir, that we go to that level of details, but I would certainly say that we have a requirement to monitor, sir, where the House of Commons devices are used from. And we monitor from regions perspective, sir. I wouldn't say that we get down to that level of granularity, sir.
So this is actually interesting you bring up the devices. So I have the iPhone that was issued for the Government of Canada. Could you track right now where I was?
We don't track, sir, where you were. We can just track the location of where you are as per the device, sir. So we don't archive all the location of where you are, sir. We actually track to make sure that devices that are participating into these events, sir, that they are within the guidelines that we've set for these meetings. Because as I said to you earlier in the previous meetings, sir, or to this committee, we do geofence, meaning that we do ensure that the people that are participating into these meetings are within the areas that we've allowed to, sir.
So the technology is there to track where your members are on the hardware. If as much as you're saying you geo fence and make precautionary that isn't abused, you could track where that I am right now sitting in my writing office, correct? On an app on my phone.
We could identify where you are, sir. I wouldn't commit, sir, to saying that you are in that particular office, sir, because we don't do that as per our security practices, sir. But we certainly ensure that you are in a specific area or region, sir.
Okay, changing gears a little bit, just on to you know, right now it is obviously we're as a committee, we don't have consensus, but one of the consensus, I believe, of reading the body language and testimony and the questions for the last few months, is that a proxy voting system would have possibly consensus across all parties. To the speaker, if we on September 21st, without spending another dollar of taxpayers' dollars, because I know we're spending lots right now, if we just implemented a proxy voting where the whips would handle it, to the speaker, is there any thoughts on if that would be ready to go sooner than September 21st?
Very simple, straightforward method. What we would need is a decision, and it would be implemented. It's fairly straightforward and simple. The question is, do individual members feel that having one person vote for them is acceptable? That would be the main question that I would bring up or think about.
So you're saying it's accessible, and it's all, if the members would feel comfortable doing that, we would have no taxpayers' dollars spent on it. We could run it next week with minimal changes to the standing order. I still have questions why we're spending taxpayers' dollars on an app that may never be used, hopefully. And if it is used, the consensus of changing standing orders would have to be found. And I don't think we're going to find that.
Yeah, I'd have to defer to someone on the cost of a proxy vote. I'm not sure what would be involved as far as cost-wise. We've looked at different options because what we're doing as a staff and as a speaker's office is looking at what members want and what we're able to do. Maybe if I could defer to Mr. Gagnon or Mr. Robert for the cost on a proxy vote.
It's really just a decision of the House as to how they want to manage a voting system, and proxy or block voting is just basically a decision. You're quite right to point it out that way.
So that would be the most affordable one, and we were going with the most expensive option out there, which is developing these electronic voting system. Is that accurate, Mr. Speaker?
When we're given direction, we want to make sure we have the best system available.
At this point, sorry, we're over the 5-minute mark, and I was just informed by the clerk a little while ago. In my mind, and I just wanted to get permission, I guess, from the committee members, whether we can start right off the top of the rounds again. That's what I had in my mind. But generally, when we do have extra time after our first round, we go back to from the 5-minute mark, the middle of after this first set where each party goes. But I think it gives each party a little bit more time if we go right back to the beginning, and we do have enough time to do that this time. So how do the members feel about whether we should be starting back at the 6-minute round or just from the 5-minute mark? And then my second question is that Miss May apparently has another meeting to attend and was wondering if she could have a few minutes of time. Okay. Okay, so we're starting off from the top, and so Mr. Tucker just had his 6 minutes then, and next will be we'll hear from Miss May. Miss May, you have one question or two, or one question? Okay, it's one question, and then we'll carry on with our regular order. Thank you, Miss May. Go ahead with your one question.
Thank you. I wanted to, first of all, underscoring the points that others have made, especially Rachel Blaney and I are both on Vancouver Island. And I have to say that the Minister of Health for BC has asked the federal government for evidence that it's actually safe to pack the airplanes. I haven't seen that evidence. I don't think it's safe. And so I'd ask my dear friends in the Conservative Party not to hope I have to get sick to prove that I was right, to be very concerned, so concerned that I paid personally for the seat next to me that I'll be taking today to get to Ottawa in hopes that I might get some physical distancing. My question is this: has the Speaker been in touch with the British Columbia legislature, where the British Columbia legislature is currently using Zoom for voting? And I'm wondering if there's been a confirmation. As far as I know, that's the first provincial legislature in Canada that is using distance voting so that people are not physically congregating in Victoria.
We haven't been in contact as of yet. There has been some contact back and forth with many provinces. BC is one that, yes, it's on our radar for the next week or so, and we plan on asking how it's gone and how it's worked. Definitely something that we've discussed with other jurisdictions, but we want to make sure that, we get all the input that we can beforehand.
Okay. Thank you. And that's it for that, right? Thank you so much, Ms. May. Mr. Tucker, would you like another minute? Because we had just gone over the 5-minute mark there, but you hadn't had your complete 6 minutes. So if you want another minute, you can go ahead with another question.
My other question would be on the longs of the, just looking over my notes here. Yeah, so the different options on cost, back to sorry to be a stickler and a Scrooge here on rating of costs associated with the decisions this committee will make. So the most affordable one is a proxy vote that seemingly all parties can agree on, that doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime, or some parties were put forward developing an electronic solution. And maybe is there a middle ground? And maybe that's the pairing or the querying of people. And Mr. Speaker, could you maybe comment on, is that the middle costed one that would cost in between the luxury of electronic voting app that you can do it anywhere in the world versus the proxy? What would be the middle option on this?
That's a good question. I'll be honest with you. We haven't really looked at it from a cost perspective. It's more from an efficiency and basically following what was the directions given by this committee and by the government and opposition House leaders in their letters. And that's where we looked at all the options that way. Once we have all the options defined and we know what's being offered, then we could decide, okay, then we could cost them out and find out exactly for a final decision. But at this point, I don't have details on it. It sounds like what you're saying makes sense. One is less expensive than the other, yeah. But that would be the logical assumption. But what I found with assumptions sometimes, I'm not always right when I assume one thing and then find out that, geez, we didn't take all this into consideration. But a lot of work has been done in the background for both those cases to make sure that they are implementable.
And along those lines,
that's all the time we've got. Next up is Mr. Turnbull, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Obey, I have a couple more questions directed for you. And just for starters, I think recently the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity certified in-camera video conferencing. Is that correct?
Yes, they did.
Great. And how would you compare the level of security needed for a public electronic vote in comparison to an in-camera video conference meeting? Would you say that the in-camera meeting requires a higher level of security than a public vote?
I wouldn't want to compare the answer, Mr. Turnbull. What I would say is that both require the level of security for the task at base, sir. And we have been engaging also with the Canadian Security Establishment on electronic voting. We've been meeting with them. They've worked with us to validate our toolbox, validate the toolkit that we want to use if ever we want to move forward with an application. And they certainly feel that the proper security measures, security controls could be put in place to make this happen, recognizing what we own here at the House of Commons.
Great. So what level of security certification would we seek for an electronic voting system if we developed one?
Well, I would say that having the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity act as an auditor for the infrastructure that we're putting in place would certainly be the appropriate level of security for such an app, sir.
Okay, great. And I know Mr. Jones testified that the House of Commons would rank as one of the top organizations in terms of IT security in the country. Would you agree with that?
I think we pride ourselves on our security, sir.
Great. You know, just to go back to this, the voting that we're talking about is legislative voting. It's a public vote. So and we've heard that there's solutions out there. The UK obviously developed one that wasn't used, but now is being used by the House of Lords, which is great to hear that that effort was not gone to waste. But you know, members can log in, they can vote, they can confirm their vote, and then they can even view the public disclosure on the website of how they voted to double check it. So what kind of real interference could we have here? Mr. Obey, can you tell me, like, what kind of interference really? I mean, the results are the results. If they're double verified, how really can someone interfere with our democratic process?
Mr. Turnbull, I believe that's the aim that we're shooting for, sir. Like, from, excuse the expression, but that's the aim of the architecture. So that way, there's multiple validation. The only place that we feel that there still could be a potential risk is having someone trying to prevent someone from voting. But I wouldn't say, I would say that we feel secure that the results will be the appropriate results. I would just say that if someone or a state-sponsored actor would try to not allow someone to participate in the voting process, but this is a very minimal risk, we believe, sir, at this stage, as in the discussion that we've had.
And could we not have a phone line system that if someone prevented them from using a web-based tool, that they could phone in those very extreme circumstances and improbable circumstances, which I think you've said, that they could just phone in and log their vote that way?
You could, sir.
Okay, great. I know that the House administration and your department pride themselves on reacting quickly and having really robust monitoring of all of the activity. And I know we've had other members ask about that today. I know that you've highlighted in the past how quick reaction time is really key. So can you speak to just how, you know, quickly you think that we could be reacting to any kind of threats or interruptions that may occur?
Well, the plan, sir, if we decide to move forward with this, is we have real-time people looking at the monitoring during these voting process, sir, so that we could actually oversee and ensure that everything is properly happening during the voting process. So both from a support perspective and also from a security perspective. Hence a little bit the timeframes that we've asked to initiate a vote so that we can turn our eyes from a security perspective to the voting process, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you. And last question, what are the repercussions, and this is to the speaker and maybe Mr. Dufresne or Mr. Robert, anybody really that wants, what are the repercussions of a member of parliament falsifying their identity? So let's say, you know, they wanted to pass off somebody else, like give their PIN and contact information to somebody else. Like, what would actually be the repercussions of doing something like that? I would think they're pretty high. Can anyone speak to that?
It's a question of privilege, and basically it would be contempt of the House. It would be very severe and the actions would have to be taken accordingly.
So based on that, do you think that most members, I mean, I think you said they're quite honorable and you don't question their integrity. What do you think the chances are that people are going to put, you know, themselves, our democratic process, their integrity at risk by, you know, just not wanting to log in and getting their kid or their wife or somebody else to log in and vote for them? Do you think that's really that likely?
I can't say on the likelihood. All I can tell you is that I trust the members and their honor and integrity, and I would have to go with that. Just like anything else, when laws are put in place, they're not put in for the majority, they're put in for the exception who are going to break those laws. So overall, I have a lot of trust in the members of Parliament, regardless of what party or what their beliefs are. It is something that I believe is tantamount to being a member of Parliament.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Madame Normandin.
Thank you. First, I'd like to know what are the chances that in a very short term we might again end up 338 MPs in the House for routine proceedings, question period. What is the likelihood? Is that probable in the short term, or are we not in that situation yet? It's sad. Well, it's unfortunate. I cannot predict the future, so it's very difficult for me with the situation to predict. We're back on September 21st, depending on what this committee in the House will decide, of course, but I do not have an answer to give you, unfortunately. But once we get to the fall, we might still not be able to be all 338 MPs for routine proceedings, probably. So right now we have a hybrid mode that allows some MPs who do not wish to fly because they're afraid or because they have elderly people or to exercise their privilege. So that is, they can, for routine proceedings, exercise that parliamentary privilege, yes. If we were to have other standing committees sitting in person, or if we were to have a voting system that did not allow electronic vote, am I right to say that a portion of parliamentary privileges could be exercised virtually, routine proceedings, for example, but if we wanted to exercise the right to vote or to sit on a standing committee, people would have to travel and move. Again, this is a decision that has to be made by this committee, or by the House, depending on what MPs want and by the House of Commons wants. The decision will be made. Right now, MPs have the choice to come in person or not, depending on what this committee will decide. They'll be able to then stay and participate from wherever. I would like to talk about the cost. Given that a lot of the work can be done virtually, if we want standing committees to sit in person, are there costs associated to that? Because people have to take a plane to come to those standing committee sittings. Yes, indeed. There are costs associated to that. As I said earlier to Mr. Tucker, we will have to see, to compare the numbers. If PROC decided to recommend that when in case of a pandemic or exceptional circumstances, we would have the virtual system for routine proceedings, but if we decide not to have electronic voting, are we not creating a disparity between those MPs who will be able to use their privilege because they'll be able to work from home or from their region, and those who, if we do everything, or it's one way to interpret things. If we would have to offer that opportunity to everyone, if we start doing things for one group only, then parliamentary proceeding is under attack. And that is of concern for every MP. My last question. If we decide to have a system that allows MPs to participate in House of Commons debates virtually, because as we said, it's likely that we won't be able to be 338 MPs in the House, that it would be logic that we would apply the same system for standing committees and for voting. Again, I'm looking for direction from your committee. It's up to the committee to decide and up to Parliament to decide. Your recommendation will influence what will be done in the House. Thank you.
Merci à vous.
Thank you, Madame Blaney, please.
Thank you. So to go back to the issue of committees, if the House decided that all committees were to be able to meet virtually in September around the 21st, how long would it take for us to get the capacity to do that?
I'll defer that question to Monsieur Aubé, who will probably be able to answer it better than I will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Blaney, for the question. I can't answer that. Our goal is to make this assessment over the next weeks to ensure that we're ready for that. But we have not finalized that assessment yet, Madam Blaney.
Thank you. That's helpful. The other question that I have is Ms. May mentioned earlier the provincial British Columbia government and the work that they're doing and how much collaboration, and that was very clear from the testimony that we had. And one of the areas that I found most compelling was the issue of testing and having the ability of members from all parties to participate in the testing process so that questions could be asked and any concerns could be brought forward. And I think especially when we look at the diversity of our MPs from across Canada, that testing should be done. And of course, everyone should be able to participate and give feedback. So I'm just wondering, as we move forward, what kind of plans has been thought about in terms of looking at potentially the app process of testing that and any other form of voting or work in the House? What is the plans for that, and do you have any direction on where we're going in that area?
You know what? Maybe what I'll do is I'll defer to Monsieur Aubé on this one, because I mean it's more of on the technical on the app. What we've done so far is looked at the different possibilities based on what has been asked of us, and coming up with the different possibilities. And you'll see in the report there's quite a number of different ones, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual, or a hybrid. And the app itself, I'll pass on to Mr. Aubé to maybe answer the question on the app and where it's at. Monsieur Aubé?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Blaney, I support the direction that you're going into towards through your question. As the speaker said, what we have right now is a toolbox. These are elements to deal with the identification, to deal with the notification, to deal with the reporting. What we need to do now is to make it a product that is usable by the members. And in order to do that, there will definitely need to be some consultations to finalize the requirements with a subset of members. There'll also need to be some end user testing to make sure that it is, usable and efficient to be used with while we're using the app. And then finally, we also need to make sure that it does work in the different regions with the limited bandwidth that exists in some areas. So this type of testing would need, and the finalizing of the requirements would be something that would be happening in the next few weeks if we are asked to move forward with such an initiative. But we just wanted to ensure at this stage, all we wanted to do is to ensure readiness if ever they decide to go, that we can start running with the members at the same time in order to be ready for the fall.
So in the earlier you spoke about being ready for September the 21st. So it sounds like testing for the process is also part of the timeline that you've outlined.
Absolutely, it would be.
Okay,
that would need to be.
That helps a lot. And I'm just wondering, has there been any thought put into, once implemented, how will there be a continuous review process? Because things change, and I'm just curious if in your plan, if you've looked at how we will review. And I think this is important because of the reality that there is so much that we don't know. And I think that's probably one of the most frustrating parts about living through COVID-19 is things are changing continuously. I think all of us wish it would go back to what we were used to in the past, but it's just not there yet. And I'm just wondering, as we go through this process, if we will be having a process where we can review and will that go through, for example, the whip's office? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So if the committee asks the House to build a product for voting, this is a standard practice that must exist in the life cycle of a product such as a voting product. Since you would be the users, the main users of this product, there'll definitely be a need for continuously improving the product based on members' feedback. The usual approach that we've taken in the past when we need to engage members is we usually do this through the whip's office. And we basically seek through the whip's office identification of members with the proper representations from all the parties. And then we work with these group of members. We've done that in the past for the constituency offices, for example, like the standards that we've established for the constituency office. We've worked with the whip's office to identify members and to do some testing. We've done that also with the new offices, Office 365, the new office for the new members. We had asked the whips to identify key members to work with. So this is standard practices, Madam Blaney, that we certainly like to see as a recommendation from the committee if you decide to move forward, that we engage the members, because this is the only way that we can make the experience successful.
Well, thank you. And I see my time is almost up, but I do want to say that during COVID in my office, we actually moved to a new location, and the House was amazing in helping us get everything set up even during that time. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. You're doing tremendous work. And I think all of us are incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney.
Thank you.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. Next up from the Conservatives, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, thank you. I actually had some very similar questions to Ms. Blaney in regards to the committees, and you did have a chance to answer, I think, most of what I wanted to answer. I mean, obviously, would be a real concern that committees all wouldn't be able to meet in September if things move ahead in a virtual kind of a way at that time. But the one thing that you didn't really cover on at that point, I mean, the capacity issues that we've had with committees and all of that. I guess there's a couple things I wanted to ask in addition to what you've already had a chance to respond to. The first one is, you already indicated that you couldn't really tell us whether we would be in the position to be able to have all the committees meet in September. That would be a real concern, I think. But if there is to be like full day virtual or hybrid sittings, what kind of an impact would that have on the committee capacity? Like, is there potential that we could see even reduced committee capacity over what we have now? So that's question one. And then question two would be, I know that one of the issues with capacity has been around like scheduling the caucus meetings. So if we were to have a sort of a regular sitting week schedule, whether it be virtual or hybrid or otherwise, virtual or hybrid, would there be the ability to be able to support all four caucus meetings simultaneously on Wednesday mornings, or would there have to be adjustments made there?
The caucus meetings themselves would be, if they're all happening at the same time and there's no committee meetings, obviously there's no problem in getting them serviced. That would not be much of an issue. So that one would work fairly well. As far as the resources and having to reduce the number of committees, again, I think Monsieur Aubé would probably be best to answer this. But overall, what I've noticed with staff here is it's amazing. Every time there's a challenge or a wall put, they do hurdles over it. I mean, it just jumps right over it and go on to the next step as if almost as if it wasn't there. So I have a lot of faith and hope in the ability of our staff, and that's something that maybe I'll let Monsieur Aubé comment on that a little bit more. Mine is based on past experience. I'll let him answer with the actual resources that he does have to work with.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, Mr. Richards. So the goal, Mr. Richards, is as you know, from a scheduling perspective, for committees, the approach is that we can schedule up to 6 committees in parallel pre-COVID. Currently, as you know, we have windows that are smaller than that, and that was basically due to the amount of people that were available to us at the beginning, the tight time frames also in order to implement these infrastructures, because they were a little bit new infrastructures within the facilities. We had to reconfigure some of our infrastructures within the committees to make this happen. And we also had a skill set issue. Having said that, over the last weeks, we've been building up on that and adapting, sir, in order to increase our capacity. And that's what we're looking at for the fall. We're basically saying, where are the pain points that we have right now, in order to plan, if possible, recognizing that all of this is going to be based on what happens from here to September from an environment perspective. But if everything would be okay, we're looking at making the decisions in order to bring back the amount of committees that we can bring back, sir.
Okay. So, yeah, so I mean, I understand that you're not able to give us a, yeah, we could absolutely have a full committee complement. Is there a chance that if there was full day sittings, you know, a regular weekly schedule, but it was done virtually or in a hybrid way, that we might see a reduced capacity for committees at this point, or do you see no concern there?
I would say, sir, like, anyways, if the COVID environment remains the same, I don't see, sir, a reduction of committees from at least from my team's ability to support you in the committees, sir. And I will only speak from that perspective. But if the environment, the COVID environment doesn't change, I wouldn't see a reductions. And that wouldn't impact our capability, sir, I guess it wouldn't impact our capability in the way that it would reduce my ability to support you in the number of committees, sir.
Okay. So yeah, so the end of the day, the bottom line of it is that we shouldn't see a reduction if there was to be full day sittings in the amount of committees, but we're not certain we'd be able to increase it to the level that would be ordinarily expected. That's
we're striving for that, sir. We're striving to bring it back to where it was previously, sir.
Of
Thank
course.
you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want a couple questions. I might not take the whole time, but just building on Mr. Tucker's questions. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Tucker raised a good point questioning people perhaps being in various different locations, you know, maybe on a beach in Florida. In the time that we've been doing the COVID-19 meetings and the hybrid meetings, are we aware of any member of Parliament who has been outside of the country while doing that?
I'm aware of only one.
Who would that be?
Yeah, Miss Rempel, who was down in, I believe, Oklahoma.
Oh,
but
wow.
other than that,
that.
she's been participating in all the virtual meetings and quite actively. So it's been working out well. So where they're located, really, unless the House wants to get into that, I'm not sure that's something that is pertinent, as long as
well, I mean, perhaps you know, Mr. Tucker raised a concern over it. Perhaps it is something that we should consider in our recommendations, that you have to be at least within the country of Canada to be participating in our democratic process. Also, Mr. Tucker raised the perhaps anecdotally said, what if somebody was you know, at a pub down the street? How do we know they're not voting from there? Are you able to say with some degree of certainty, Mr. Speaker, that no member of Parliament has ever cast a vote while under the influence of alcohol?
I don't know. I can't say for sure one way or the other.
Okay. And one last thing he said was about perhaps spending money on an app that we never end up using. You know, my thought on that is, would you agree that there's a lot of things that we spend money on that perhaps we hope we never have to use? I mean, we hope we never have to use the Parliamentary Protective Service, but we still need to have it there in case we need to use it, right? I mean, like, we hope that we never have an incident that requires their usage, but we accept the fact that it is a risk, and therefore we should be investing in mitigating that risk.
That's certainly a point of view.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll
just, and the last thing I'll ask is just to jump back to the previous round of questioning. I had asked you, and not I'm not trying to interject you into the political decision making of this. And Mr. Obey did touch on this with another set of questions, but is there a preferred method that's been discussed with amongst the clerk's office and in the discussions about voting in terms of the ease of voting? What would be the easiest way of doing it, whether it would be through Zoom or an app or anything like that? Has there been any discussion that's led to that?
There's been much discussion on it. I would hope that the direction would come from the committee based on what we've given as far as facts go, rather than us dictating to the committee or suggesting to the committee what would be best. I think if you read through the literature and take a look at what we've put forward so far, I would hope that the committee would be able to make that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have any other questions, Madam Chair. If there's another member that would like to use that, Ms. Duncan, I don't know if
I believe Ms. Pettypat Taylor is raising her hand. Go ahead. You have about 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll just ask a few questions since we've got a bit of extra time. I think first and foremost, we would all recognize or agree that Canadians have really taken the public health warnings very seriously when it comes to dealing with COVID-19. We've certainly have seen a huge economic impact as a result of COVID-19, and the loss of life has still been substantive in this country. But when we look at the overall measures that Canada has taken, we have a lot to be proud of. I'm hearing a lot of talk about the investments that we could possibly be making with respect to developing an app. And I think if we look at all businesses within the country right now, we are all looking at making sure that we have a continuity plan in the event that we have a second wave. So my first question would be for Mr. Obey. The cost of developing an app, would you be able to provide us with a bit of an estimate? I mean, everyone is kind of not asking that direct question, but I'm wondering what would be the cost that we are looking at developing an app that we could use for the continuity of Parliament?
Well, as I said, Madam Pettypat-Taylor, earlier in my comments, we've been leveraging our existing resources right now that are currently funded by the House for other activities. So we've prioritized some of their activities in order to focus on this because we wanted to ensure that we're ready if we're asked to be ready. So I consider that to be a sunk cost as it relates to the resources that were being used right now.
Okay, unfortunately that's all the time we had, I think. But there is another opportunity coming up after the Conservatives go. So who is next for the Conservatives?
I think that would be me, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Brassard, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have a couple of questions, and I appreciate the fact that Mr. Gerritsen hasn't had a cavity in 7 years. I haven't had a headache in the last week and a half, but I've had one today, and that usually appears when I'm around arrogance and condescension. But I will say my next question is to the Speaker. One of the issues that came up during the course of this study, and there's been a lot of talk about honorable members, but Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you can understand the issue of voting electronically could be abused. Could be abused in the sense that perhaps a member in a close riding, for example, during an election, wouldn't want to come to Ottawa because they are battling a close election. Or there could be another circumstance that came up where an MP who is charged with a serious criminal offense perhaps wouldn't want to be in Ottawa because then they would have to face the parliamentary press gallery and in some cases perhaps the opposition. So I'm wondering what circumstances, or has there been any circumstances considered at all where there would be consequences to those situations where it could be implied or otherwise that a member of Parliament is just avoiding their responsibility of being in the seat of Parliament in Ottawa for their own electoral purposes or to avoid the parliamentary press gallery in the event that they're charged with a serious criminal offense. I think you have to press mute, Mr.
I'm on mute. Sorry about that. I believe that what we're looking at here is COVID-19. This is not an ongoing thing where people would be able to chime in and vote whenever. So once COVID-19 is over, or the safety period, the concerned period is over, then we would return to normal proceedings. Now, I've seen other jurisdictions where they've used it for maternity leave or other areas. That's something, again, that would have to be taken into consideration, not only by the committee, but the members of Parliament themselves. But at this point, what we're looking at is how do we deal with COVID-19 or any future pandemic, and what will trigger that mechanism to work.
And part of the concern is that, this could extend beyond COVID-19. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I don't like asking you a political question, but you were a Liberal candidate in the last election, and on page 54 of the party platform, the Liberal Party platform, it said, with Parliament to introduce new technology or other institutional changes. Now, as someone who was a Liberal candidate running on that platform, what was your understanding of what that commitment may look like? And would it be your understanding that the issues that we're dealing with here today could satisfy the Liberal Party platform?
Well, as a member of Parliament, as a progressive member of Parliament, I always want to see things work better. And I want to see how we can improve on what we have. So whatever we have and we make better, I think that's the way we all look. And I believe that's the same for all MPs when we're looking at the system or the legislation that we're looking at. We want to make sure that it's working better than what we have today. So that's basically how I read it and how I see it. So it's basically, how do we see things working better than they are today and serving Canadians better?
Thank you. One last question, Madam Chair, to Mr. Obey. On June 11th, the committee voted to order the production of the House agreement and related documents with Zoom. Can you confirm whether any of those documents have been provided to our clerk, Mr. Obey?
They have been provided, sir.
They have been?
Yep.
Thank you so much. That's it, Madam
Is
Chair.
that
Thank
it?
you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Broussard, they were provided by the deadline and they were circulated to all of the committee members. So
thank you.
Please check back. Ms. Pettipat-Taylor.
How much time do I have, Madam Chair?
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I may not be using all of my time, so if my other committee members want to get ready, that'd be fine. I also wanted to take a moment to thank our witnesses that have appeared today. Once again, you always shed a lot of light to the many questions that we have, so thanks to each and every one of you for being here once again today. I wanted to follow up my questions to Monsieur Obey as well. During my question, you indicated when talking about the issue of cost, you had indicated that it's a sunk cost. What did you mean by that?
What I meant by that, Madam Pettipat-Taylor, is that we're already paying for the salaries of these employees right now. So in order for preparedness, we reprioritize their activities in order to work on this. So recognizing that we're already paying for their salary, whether they're working on this or not, I consider that to be the definition of what the sunk cost, meaning that it's not an additional cost to the House of Commons, recognizing that they're already paid by the House of Commons.
Great. So I just wanted to confirm that there's no additional cost being incurred as a result of working on the development of an app.
That was the intent.
Great. And I think we all can recognize as well with respect to businesses across the country, as I've indicated, many of them are working to make sure that they are prepared to deal with a second wave of COVID-19. And all Canadians would expect that as parliamentarians that we are going to do all that we can to ensure that we can continue to do the important work that Canadians have sent us here to do. So I think it's just very responsible on our part to make sure that we have the tools that we need in order to use them if needed. But again, making sure that I think we all stress that we want to be back to Ottawa as soon as possible to be that strong voice for our constituents. I have another question for Monsieur Obey. I feel like I'm picking on you, so my apologies about that. But during one of your lines of questioning, and I believe perhaps it was Madame Blaney, but I'm not sure. We had talked about the issue of a hybrid system and the issue of the possibility that perhaps people could vote in person, but also electronically? And how would we ensure that that was not going to take place? Or maybe that was Madame Normandin. And you had indicated at one point that there would have to be some types of controls that would need to be put in place in order to ensure that that did not happen. Have you thought about those types of controls? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, there has been a lot of discussions on that subject. The first premise was to eliminate that possibility from happening. So this is why one of the recommendations made by Mr. Gagnon's group and my group was to say, well, let's all use the same system. So that way electronically we can validate in real time if people are voting once or twice, because we can authenticate who's voting on the system. Now, having said that, if the committee would ask that in an hybrid voting system, people could vote in the House using the raising or using their person to vote versus using the system, that's something that we're going to need to look at together with the people in Mr. Gagnon's shop to establish the controls, the process to ensure. But having said that, electronically, we can actually ensure that the votes of one member is not tallied twice. We can actually control that. There's an ability to actually, if someone enters the vote of a person versus the electronic system, we can ensure that it's not entered twice for the same person. That's fairly easy to do. It's just more a time issue and an efficiency issue within the chamber. If we're being asked to control that the people in the House are not also voting electronically, that would require some time at the end of a vote to ensure that this happens.
Great. And I wonder if Mr. Gagnon has anything to add to that, because we often see him around the table and making sure that we are voting appropriately.
Inaudible for the interpreter. Sorry. Yes. Sometimes MPs voted twice in the past. Sometimes they will say yes, and then they say no. So this is quite frequent.
Stefan just mentioned, it would be very important that not to mix those two types of voting, which was if the House were to decide to vote in an electronic way, it would need to do so even for members that would be in the House in an hybrid model of sitting. And if the House were to choose to go with in-person voting, it would be important for the House to do so, if they want to do so, to relate to that and go all the way on it. That said, as the speaker mentioned a bit earlier today, there could be some possibility where in some specific cases, members would be allowed to vote remotely. And I think Mr. Speaker mentioned that members who were on maternity leave or sick leave.
Okay, thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Broussard.
Thank you. I'm just trying to confirm with Mr. Obe, because one of the things that we asked for is in all the related documents with Zoom was the actual contract with Zoom. Now, I can tell you that I haven't seen that, and if I haven't, then it's my mistake. And I just want confirmation that the contract with Zoom was circulated to members of the committee. So I know, talking to some of my colleagues, that they haven't seen the Zoom contract either. So is it there? Okay.
Justin, do you want to
Yes, Madam Chair. On June 15th, the House Commons Administration did provide the committee, per its order, for the documents, multiple documents of a sort of contractual nature between the House of Commons and Zoom. There was an email sent out to the members of the committee at, and I have it right here, at 11:48 p.m. on June the 15th. That was received by me approximately about 20 minutes before I sent it out to the full members of the committee.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just I'll go back and look for it. Maybe I missed it in the volume of documents. Thank you.
No problem. I mean, we were all surprised because we had received it just in the nick of time. So that's why it really stood out.
Okay, thank you.
But we are carrying on with 2.5 minutes each for first from Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Obe. We're talking about a successive approach for an electronic voting system. So do you already have an idea of what the calendar will look like? We're going to have to make a report before July 21st, and we hope that everything will be ready for September. So will this give you enough time to establish and test the electronic system? We think so, Madame Normandin. We do think that it will be possible and that we will be ready. We've been working on this on the past few weeks, and we think we will be able to respect this deadline. However, it will really depend on your schedule, because we're going to have to talk to a lot of people, and we are doing this internally, but then we also have to test it with all of you, and we want to be sure that we will be able to do all of the consultation that is necessary before being able to go ahead with this. Very well. But testing with MPs can be done on an individual basis. You don't need to have a group setting for this. Answer, yes, you can do it on an individual basis. But I meant that we would be working with a group of MPs. There would be individual consultations, and then we'd hear their feedback. So part of it will need a certain collaboration between MPs. Yes, that would be a good thing. We'd have to do a simulation, and then after that, we would have a larger simulation with more MPs involved. Very well. And I also have another question quickly. So Plan A is that everyone will be voting in person in the House. And now we're working on Plan B, and that would be an app where we'd be using our devices, our House devices. Have you established a Plan C in case Plan B falls through? Do we have another plan in mind? Well, Plan C, we did talk about it a bit today. Plan A was presented today by the Speaker of the House. And this is a question that was arising from the leader of the official opposition. And then we were also talking with Mr. Turnbull about other plans. If ever there was an issue for some MPs, how will we be able to help them and give them another tool or another way of communicating with us? So we are considering all of these possibilities, but it will have to be recommended by your committee first. So it would be good if we made a recommendation about this, and we should recommend a Plan C? Answer, yes, that would be a good idea. Because our first premise is that if there is a problem that arises and an MP can't vote, what are you going to do? Are you going to propose another option? Are you going to recommend another option if there's an issue for one of the MPs? So your committee could recommend this. Thank you very much.
Blaney, please.
So of course, I think, when we look at our traditional format of voting in the House, of course, we're all in the House and we stand to be recognized voting either yes or no. I'm just curious about the capacity of us to use Zoom to do something similar. What's the difference between using something where people would stand on Zoom and we'd be able to see that person stand up and vote, compared to having an app? Is it connectivity that is the challenge? And in either issue, what is the plan of addressing connectivity? So if we have somebody, and I know this happens to me sometimes more when I'm at home than when I'm in the office, where I just have a day where the connectivity is not very good and I keep getting bounced out. And it's sounded like a few of our members have had that experience in their constituency office as well. So those are my two questions.
The first question.
Mr. Speaker, you're muted.
Yeah.
Yes,
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Obey. You'll probably do a better job than I will. Anyway.
No, go ahead, sir. I thought that you weren't speaking, so that's why I didn't see your lips in the speaker's room. Sorry about that. Go ahead, sir.
No. I was going to just talk about how important it is for verification of the individual who's voting, and that's one of the key things that we have to work on. And then pass it over to Monsieur Obey if there's anything else, because I know there has been some security concerns on who is actually voting. And the vote in the House, I mean, if you want, you could do a visual or actually have an electronic voting in the House, as was mentioned earlier, where the person's name is displayed once the vote is taken, and they can see what they voted, and everyone can see it. So you really see instantaneously confirming what you've done, and within 30-minute period, you could. Well, I'll let. You, again, depending on the direction we get, you could change your vote, or you could leave it as is, depending on what you thought. It's happened in the House where people stand and vote the wrong way. I can honestly say I've done that before while I was in the benches, and it'll happen again before long. Yeah, so anyways, I'll let Monsieur Obey continue before I get myself deeper in trouble here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Mr. Speaker answered the first part of the question, but the question of the difference between using Zoom versus using an app, Mrs. Blaney, is really about enabling more mobility to the member. So we want to, and then that's one part. The second part is efficiencies. We believe that through a voting app, you could generate more efficiencies to accelerate the members' votes when they're doing the votes. So during the bells, if there's multiple motions that the person could be voting on, the app could accelerate that for the members and make it easier for them than having to stand in the meeting and having to say yay or nay on each of the motions. So it's just flexibility that you can give yourself if you decide to choose so.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that completes 2 rounds of questions. I just wanted to know from the members if anybody does have any more questions, we could start off at the top of the the 5-minute round if there are other questions, or we can just briefly for a couple of minutes. I just had a few things to put on notice for tomorrow's meeting, so it's really up to you. Is there a desire to continue with questions? Mr. Tucker, you have one question.
It's a rant and then a small question, if that's acceptable.
And is there, so do we want to go up back to the 5-minute round or just allow Mr. Tucker to have his question? Is that good? Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Tucker.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Comments I'd like to put on the record are around cost again. And no surprise that I am allergic to spending taxpayers' dollars when you don't need to. And the idea that Ottawa is working or improving things in Canada is, I don't think, held widely in my province or across Canada. I think there is ample waste going on with our federal government that we don't need to find new creative ways to waste taxpayers' dollars on an app that don't mind the partisanship of this, but that right now we have real serious questions with the ethics commissioner about sole source contracts and runaway boondoggles. This is going to be another example of government thinking that they can do things better than previous governments or in the past. And I think this is another example where, you know, in generations to come, or my kids will be paying for this debt, and it irritates the people that I represent that we're talking about plan A, B, and C with no hard cost. We're going with seemingly the most expensive, the most elaborate solution to a simple project that could be done with proxy voting tomorrow. And when my kids ask me 20 years from now, when I was an MP, what did you do to stop the $1 trillion+ in debt that is being racked up? I hope to tell them that, you know what, it was only a couple $1 million, but you know what, nickels and dimes make dollars, and we were able to stop excessive spending in Ottawa a little bit. I would hope that I could tell them in 20 years' time that my role in this is that we were able to maybe their income tax rate, instead of being 54%, will be 53%, but it's going in the right direction. So I am very frustrated that we are going with the most expensive option out there, while off the shelf, not even off the shelf, we have ability to do proxy voting today. So that's my only comments, is that I would hope that if we can find a solution that consensus across all parties with a solution that doesn't cost another dime of the taxpayer's money. I'm kind of frustrated that we're not considering that road, not as plan C, but plan A.
You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Sorry, you know what I was just saying, is there anything else? I saw a couple of mics unmute themselves and then mute themselves again, so I wasn't sure.
Can I ask Mr. Obey one final follow-up question?
Okay, Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Obey, I just wanted to go back to the answer that you gave to Ms. Pettipat-Taylor. She had asked you, and I heard you say that this system would be built by House of Commons employees. Is that correct?
It is the case, sir.
And so if an app-based voting system was done, it'd be built by House of Commons employees. And you said that you would just be reprioritizing what those employees do. So it's the same employees that were going to be paid the same amount of money no matter what, correct?
It is the case right now, sir.
Thank you.
I think before, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on another note regarding testing, if I could, to Mr. Obey and even to the Speaker, just to, as we look at recommendations, I think we've asked several witnesses about testing, and I know Madame Normandin had just asked some other questions on it. You'd mentioned about having a small group of MPs test the system before going to a larger. Would that be PROC? How would you pick members? Would PROC be a natural spot? I'm just thinking maybe getting that on the record, perhaps for some of our recommendations of trying to make ourselves as useful as possible here in our committee. Would that be a natural selection of our PROC committee members being the guinea pigs, for lack of a better word?
Am I being asked to answer, Mr.
Yes,
Speaker?
Mr.
I can start off and I'll let you finish.
Anybody.
If I could, based on past experience, what we did, even with the hybrid system that we have for the COVID-19 committee, it started off as a concept. Then it became implemented. What we did is we got a bunch of staff on board, some of them in the chamber, some of them outside the chamber, some of them from their homes, who all came on board and tested it. And then what we did is we got a number of MPs to test it out to see if it would work across the country. And what I'll do is I'll then pass it on to Mr. Obey, who will give you more of a technical background on it. So there is testing that happens, and it's amazing how quickly it all came about. So again, I'm very proud of the staff, and I'll be honest with you, of all the MPs who participated, because it really was something that the world looked on and with admiration, and something that we can all be proud of. Monsieur Obi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just described the exact approach that we would like to take if we're being asked. I certainly, Mr. Duncan, won't want to remove that decision from the whips. As you know, this is part of their responsibility, so I would leave that to them. But it would certainly be a great recommendation for the people that have participated and listened to all these witnesses to participate into the development and the testing would be a great asset to us at the House of Commons.
If I could add just one more thing on that, Mr. Duncan, I think the PROC committee is very useful and very helpful, and I do admire and appreciate all the work that you are doing right now. So whatever you can do, I'm sure you will volunteer to make this an even better process, whatever you decide on. Thank you.
Great save, Mr. Speaker.
You're going to say no pressure on our parts now. There we go.
Thank you. Okay, before adjourning, all I wanted to say is that we do need a time frame to get all the submissions for recommendations in. I know in the past we had this discussion, but we were kind of unable to set a deadline because we were waiting for this meeting to occur, and also the response from the Speaker to the Opposition House Leader's letter. So now that all of this has happened, I was wondering if maybe we could even hear from the analyst in terms of when we would need all the recommendations finalized so that the interpreters and the production teams had enough time to meet our deadline. Go ahead, Andre.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
Can you help us with like a fixed date or some guidance?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to give a very helpful answer. My answer would be that I'm at the committee's disposal. I'm not entirely sure when members are going to feel comfortable about making recommendations. I'll do whatever I can once the recommendations come in to add them to the report.
Okay, I'm seeing for tomorrow's meeting, we do have some committee business scheduled, and of course, the majority of the meeting will be consideration of the draft report. Last time we got through a lot of the draft report. The version that we will be using tomorrow is the July 3rd version that was sent out, the most recent version that was sent out. That version has a track changes copy and a clean copy that has been attached. Any preference as to which copy you would like to go off of tomorrow? I know that that was brought up last time.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Richards and Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, Madam Chair, on that note, just an idea or a thought, and I'll see what other members think on this. But I know was kind of thinking a little bit about the idea of tomorrow's meeting, and obviously based on today, there may be some changes required to the report. I would assume quite a bit of information and a lot of questions that were answered today, which I think will be helpful. Maybe if I can, through you, Madam Chair, just to ask our analyst to get some sense as to how much change would potentially be required to the report. As I have some thoughts, but I just wanted to see what his what our analyst take would be on what kind of change, how much change would be required to the report based on today.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And we do have 2 meetings remaining this week, and we've got 3 for next week. So so that you know that as well. Andre, in terms of additions from today's meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if Mr. Richards was wondering, like the volume, or because it might be about an extra page would be added from today's meeting.
I think time frame maybe.
And I could have it.
Of not only in additions, but whether there might be some changes to what we, to what our existing text is as well, and what what you think the scope of that would be.
At first glance, my approach as of right now would be to add as opposed to alter what's currently there.
Okay.
And that would be done by end of day tomorrow at the latest, and then sent and ready for translation.
Okay. Well, I mean, that may change my thoughts then. I was thinking that potentially, might be more beneficial for us to, rather than carry forward with a meeting tomorrow, kind of come forward on Thursday and have the final clean report. But if it's a matter of adding rather than changing anything in the existing report, it may not be, that may not be necessary then.
I also think, in terms of what I was saying before, we did get through a large chunk of the report last time, quite a lot of it, and so there's not that much. The discussion portion is where we last left off. I think we didn't go through the provincial sections, but we had the previous meeting, so there wasn't much to change in the provincial section. So we could go through that quickly, and then we'd really very much be on the discussion, and that's the section that hosts all of the recommendations. So I think we'll probably be diving into some of discussion on that at least. Not to say that, there's not going to be changes, and Madame Normandin also circulated some recommendations that she's wanting to put forward, and she's also prefaced that with saying, they may be altered a little bit, but those are her initial thoughts, and so that was very helpful. And if anyone else wants to circulate that to the rest of the committee or just bring them tomorrow or the next meeting, I think that would be helpful. But maybe I'm thinking by Thursday, if we could have a good sense of all of our recommendations and have them in, that will give us enough time, I think, to really be able to discuss them and then appropriately decide on them. What does everyone think? I know that Andre didn't really give us any kind of hard and fast deadline, but I think you know, I think a chunk is already in. I think some of the parties have been talking from what I'm hearing of what they want in the report. And so we'll probably be seeing some of that tomorrow in tomorrow's meeting. But if yeah, I want to give you enough time and not say tomorrow because we have heard so much today that perhaps Thursday's meeting would be the more appropriate meeting to have all of that finalized and in for. Does that sound good? Justin, any feedback from you as to whether that's possible? Before we hear from Justin, Mr. Richards.
Well, let's hear from our clerk, and then I might have comments to add. Yeah.
Madam Chair, if the suggestion was that draft recommendations from all parties would be available to the committee for this coming Thursday meeting, there may be timeline issues involved with that in terms of the translation and then having them providing enough time for Andre to incorporate them into a draft report, all for Thursday. So that may suggest a fairly tight time deadline for draft recommendations to be submitted by everybody. So
Perhaps I was being too flexible.
Well, we make best efforts to have it ready, but there may be some time pressure in terms of getting all of that material translated for the coming Thursday meeting.
So what would you say then, perhaps Wednesday?
Well, I mean, if you were, for example, to provide a deadline, say end of day Wednesday, then the idea perhaps would be to have that material turned around and incorporated into the draft report for one of the draft for the meeting next Monday. And then that would provide opportunity to have everything translated and incorporated into a new draft.
Okay, Mr. Richards.
Okay, so yeah, I thought it would be helpful to have that knowledge. So essentially, what it sounds like is we would need, 2 full business days following the submission of recommendations by all parties in order for them to be ready for whatever meeting. Like, so Wednesday for Monday, Thursday for Tuesday. And I mean, obviously, expecting them sooner than the end of day Wednesday is probably a stretch. I assume. That leaves parties like sort of a day and a half, or I guess that's what two and a half days, I guess, which is pretty fairly reasonable. And even doing a day sooner wouldn't still allow us to have them in time for Thursday's meeting. Is kind of the understanding I have. So just to get a little more clarity from you, Madam Chair, on what the expectations would be then for the meeting on both tomorrow and Thursday. Obviously, the intention would be to try to go through the discussion portion of the of the report and try to conclude that, saving the part that maybe won't be completed yet based on today's meeting. Then you sort of mentioned about some discussion about the portion of the report that would have recommendations in it. How would you see that looking more? Like, I don't see how that would logistically work, but I'm also struggling to understand what we would then do on Thursday's meeting if we don't actually have the materials prepared. So it may be that we'd have to look at the following week and maybe adding a meeting there if needed, or just trying to conclude it all with the days we do have the following week. Because I just don't, I guess I'm trying to understand what we would actually
from what I'm hearing, I think most of the parties,
we're still working on discussion on the discussion section, but I would hope that won't be the case. So I'm just trying to get some clarity as to what your plan is.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
I think you're correct. Like we'd start on the discussion section pretty much, and that's the part that has all of the recommendations. The way the analyst has laid out the report, the recommendations fall into the discussion section, and so I believe most of the parties have their recommendations fairly prepared and will probably be wanting to discuss them tomorrow. But I want to give you leeway as well. At the same time, I'm just wanting to make sure that you're ready, because I sense that you would not maybe perhaps be ready because of given the testimony today and the new additions. So that's all. But I do think most of the parties, and you can speak up, I guess, the other members, if you are ready to bring your recommendations with you to tomorrow's meeting, then we can start discussing some of them. But that doesn't mean the report would still not get finalized until everyone's recommendations are in. So I'm at your mercy, I guess, however you guys want to do it.
Sure. Madam Chair, on that then, I guess, like I feel like I'm maybe hearing two different things, and I am a little confused. I'll first say this: I think that in order to be discussing recommendations, we should have all parties' recommendations, and that's not to say that if other parties are ready, and perhaps my party will have to just have a quick powwow on that, but maybe we could be ready as well for. But I'm hearing, I think, two different things here. I'm hearing like our clerk is kind of indicating that we would need to have everything translated and all of that done in order to be able to have those discussions. And then I'm hearing you say, well, we can have some of those discussions with having some of the recommendations, but I guess we wouldn't have the translations and things like that. So like, I need I guess I'm looking for some clarity on what we can and can't do, because I don't think it's reasonable, frankly, to have discussion about recommendations when we have some of them and not all of them. And if we're being told that we can go ahead and have discussions without the translations and things like that, that does change, and maybe we could try to push ourselves to try and have things ready. But if in fact that's not the case, that we can't actually do that, well then I'd rather take the time to get things.
Well, I'd love it if you could have them ready for tomorrow.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get clarity though. Like, our clerk is telling us, I feel like I'm hearing something different from our clerk than I'm hearing from you, and I guess I'm trying to get a sense as to like what is the process here, because I'm hearing from our clerk that we have to have it translated.
I guess what I'm saying is it shouldn't preclude discussion. I'm not saying we have to vote on anything tomorrow at all. I think maybe we'll refrain from voting on anything and finalizing things. But because Madame Normandin had already circulated, her recommendations are already out there, and I'm sure other people will be mentioning what they're looking to recommend tomorrow. So we could start discussing and formulating and where it would be best inserted. During the discussion tomorrow, we go through the draft report, and then I'm just thinking naturally it's going to come up because there's already some on the table, but we don't have to vote on them. That's what I'm trying to say. And we could maybe have an official deadline of Wednesday, end of day, where they're completely translated and then incorporated into the report. And then at that point only would we move forward on voting on some of them.
Sure. Okay, so 2 points on that then, Madam Chair, and I mean, I guess it's up, if I'm the only one feeling this way, or if some of my own colleagues in my party feel this way, and all the other parties disagree, well, I guess we're going to do it the other way. But there's two things. First of all, I don't think it's fair or reasonable to have discussions and whether there's voting or not on them about recommendations when only some of them are there. And this is not to try to stall or anything like that. It's just obviously based on today, we want to do a little bit of work. So tomorrow we wouldn't be able to be ready, but we might be able to be for Thursday for that discussion, depending on whether we're allowed to go ahead and do it officially without the translation and whatnot being done by the committee workers. And if that's the case, well then great. If that's not the case, then I think, my second point would be that I'm not one that believes in having a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. So if it's like, well, let's discuss some things, but we can't actually make any decisions, and we'll have to just come back and do it all over again when we have, I don't see the point in that. Like, that seems to me like just filling, digging a hole and filling it in kind of a thing. And I'm not a big fan of that. So maybe I'm the only one feeling this way, but I would much rather have we've got everything in, it's in a proper format, and we're prepared, and we actually do it, and we try to get through it and work to complete it as quickly as we can rather than just filling time. So if like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like,
Sure.
no problem. Obviously the idea, if we're prepared, there's not going to be changes to the existing part of the report. That's the actual just, background stuff that we've been working on. Fine, we finished that, but I don't know that I'm a believer that we would then want to start to get into discussion about recommendations or things like that until we are actually in a spot where we're prepared to actually deal with it properly and appropriately. And I don't think we're there for tomorrow for sure. And there's some question mark in my mind whether that's the case for Thursday. If we can go ahead and do it without having all these official translations and all the rest, great. But if I'm hearing that we can't do that, then perhaps we're better off to just focus our work on when we actually are in the right spot to do it. That's what I'm trying. I hope that I'm clear on what I'm suggesting, and I don't know how others feel about it. So maybe I'm the only one feeling that way. But
I'm not sure the end date you're suggesting anymore, but I was just trying to be flexible. Really, we could just discuss the discussion portion. I don't care if we don't discuss recommendations at all because everyone doesn't feel comfortable and we can do them on Thursday. That's totally fine. I was just saying that it seems like it'll naturally come up. But if it doesn't, that's fine with me. And Justin, is the date for Wednesday good then? Ideally, I would like the date for tomorrow, but I was just trying to be flexible and give everyone enough time. But I feel like I've kind of walked into something, which now I think we've cleared up. That you definitely would not be ready for recommendations tomorrow, and it seems like the team needs recommendations at least by Wednesday, so that they can translate them and have all that work done for us. So does that sound good? Then we would just go through the discussion portion and whatever's left of the draft report tomorrow, have the recommendations officially in for Wednesday, and then we carry on with Thursday's meeting.
Sure. That from my perspective, Madam Chair, sounds just fine. The only thing was I thought I heard from our clerk that he didn't feel we could actually have them in Wednesday and be ready for Thursday. And if we can be ready for Thursday, if they're in Wednesday, well, great. But my sense was I was hearing that wasn't the case, and that was the only issue. So I was wondering if was Thursday going to be possible. If it is, well, great.
Madam Chair, it's Justin again. For example, Wednesday potentially could work depending when all the recommendations could be provided into me. For example, if it's say around 12 noon, that would buy some additional time for translation. One of the issues, of course, for translation is it depends on the total volume of material that needs to be translated. And then there is also some time that's needed by the analyst to incorporate that into a new draft and have that turned around. I defer in some respects to Andre about this as well in terms of what may be feasible if we're talking about a timeline for draft recommendations to be sent in on Wednesday with the view of then having some new version of a report that may include draft recommendations for the Thursday meeting. That is sort of one of the issues. In terms of time constraint, it might also be possible just to have the draft recommendations in a separate document, and members can go through those in companionship with a draft of the report, which would cut down on some of the time. Obviously, one of the factors here is the translation time that is required. If the documents weren't to be translated, for example, it would obviously cut out a lot of the needed time. However, one of the routine motions of the committee, as we all know, is that the material does get distributed in both official languages unless there is consent, unanimous consent of the committee to do otherwise. But that would be an approach to obviously cut down on the amount of time to turn the material around back to the members for the Thursday meeting.
Any discussion in response to that? Would you like to have, if it's easier, I don't know, I guess Andre could tell us if are you going to insert it if we do have recommendations to you at some point for Wednesday? Would you find it easier to have them just in a separate document or inserted right into the report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's difficult to comment on this because there's too many unknowns. it depends how many recommendations there are, how lengthy there are. If there's a lot and it's very lengthy, it'll take a while for translation to be able to turn that around. And then the more recommendations that there are, the more work it'll be for me to insert them. Is there overlap among the recommendations? There's just too many unknowns, unfortunately, for me to speak about it intelligently.
Madame Normandin.
Yes, maybe a point of clarification. The last time, if I'm not mistaken, we had to give our recommendation already translated. Is that still the case? Just to be certain that I understood correctly. And also I'd like to confirm, what I sent to everyone doesn't really, these are not final recommendation necessarily. It's just that if you intend to formulate something similar, we could get together and do a joint recommendation just to, save some time and ahead of time.
I do also recall thinking the parties needed to translate because we were under the wire. We didn't have a lot of time, and so we had the parties translate and submit. And that's precisely what you had just brought up there. Precisely what I was trying to say for tomorrow's meeting is that now that there are some recommendations that the bloc has put forward, that there might be other recommendations people have that you want to combine, and rather than last time we had to group, like recommendations, put like recommendations together, and then we had to discuss which recommendation overlapped which portion and then kind of remove it. And so that's all I was really saying, is that we could probably have some of that discussion tomorrow if it naturally occurs, and the parties feel ready to have some of that discussion. But if it doesn't occur, then that's fine as well, because then we can do it after all of the recommendations are viewed and all of them are finalized by the parties. But in terms of interpretation, Justin, is that something that we could consider this time, is have the parties interpret?
Well, if the members were to commit to providing their draft recommendations in both official languages, meaning that it would fall to them to have the material translated before they submit it to me, it would buy a good amount of time in terms of the work that would need to be done to have the material prepared for Thursday. However, what we're end up doing is we're just moving the burden related to the timeline, shifting it from what the committee staff needs to do onto the shoulders of the member's office in terms of getting their translation work done before they're in a position to submit their draft recommendations in both official languages. But from our perspective, from committee staff, and again, I would defer to Andre, it would make things easier for us if by Wednesday what we received from all the members of the committee were English and French versions of their draft recommendations.
And I'm happy to do that. I think that as we go forward, tomorrow we're going to have a better sense of what we need to do on Thursday. So I don't know if we're ready to have that conversation, but it may be something that we have to have, and we will have our recommendations in. Of course, we have to review our recommendations with the context of what we heard today, but I'm happy to make sure that they are received on Wednesday translated. And I also just wanted to clarify with Mr. Richards, he said that there was going to be a powwow, and I'm wondering what that looks like, or did you mean a meeting?
I think he meant with his, maybe with the other Conservative members. I think he meant he was going to have a powwow.
I have no idea what she's talking about, actually. To be honest with you, I don't recall.
I think you said something like we have to discuss, but I think you may be have been referring to your.
You said you were going to have a powwow with your members, so I was just asking for clarification. I think you meant a meeting.
Yeah.
I don't recall the comments, so sorry, I can't help you. I don't even know what I was referring to.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so if all the parties could have their recommendations in, it sounds like we've come to a consensus for Wednesday noon. Would that work? Everybody could have their recommendations in for Wednesday noon?
In both languages, Madam Chair, if that is what is being suggested?
Yeah, it seems like Ms. Blaney's able to do that, and most are. That would be very helpful. Mr. Richards, yeah.
We'll certainly do our best. You know, I would hope that we can. We'll do our best for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Okay. All right. Sorry, and sorry I didn't catch the issue that you brought up, Miss Blaney. I didn't catch that or recall that in the same way either.
Oh, don't
and I
worry.
should have,
It will be in the notes and Mr. Richards can review it.
Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Anyways, so okay. So one other thing that we're going to have to discuss in tomorrow's meeting is as well as Mr. Obey's testimony that was provided in camera. Those notes were circulated, and there's a portion that they found was still sensitive material, and they've just struck that out. So we can discuss that, I guess, when we're in camera in tomorrow's meeting. And Mr. Obey is willing to make himself available for that if there are any questions as to, if you have any questions to him as to why the redacted portions are redacted and why they're considered to be sensitive. Justin, do you think maybe we could deal with that right at the top of the meeting? So that
if that's what the committee wants to do, it would probably make it also easier in terms of organizing Mr. Obey's availability. That it'd be an issue that'd be dealt with right away at 11 a.m. when the meeting starts.
Yeah, and there might not be many questions for him, so he might not have to be here for very long. But if there are some, then at least he's here to field those questions, and then we can move on to the draft consideration of the report. Consideration of the draft report. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye.